Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Tonight, I would like to talk about an article that appeared in the Zimbabwe Herald by George Charamba under the assumed name of, is it Jamanda, Ben?
Yes, Jamanda, that's right.
Okay. It's basically trying to compare the GNU of 2008 to 2013 to the government of national unity that has been formed in South Africa after ANC lost its majority and was forced to form a coalition. There are many aspects that he covers in that letter, and we would like to discuss them with the help of Ben. Ben, welcome.
Thank you for having me on the program, and good evening to everybody out there.
So what do you make of this article?
I found this article very, very interesting. And when you take time to look back on the events that actually did happen in, during that period of 2008 to 2013, you will find that, it's quite true what George Charamba is saying there, that what happened with the MDC folk once they got into the GNU. So he starts by saying, when the GNU was formed, everybody within the MDC ranks was excited about the prospect of finally getting into government, right? And it turned out that whilst they were in government, they liked, what was being offered there to them, which was mainly, the perks of being ministers and being in government. The houses, the luxury cars, that they totally forgot about what the real purpose was. And George Charamba there says, it worked perfectly out for Zanu PF, that they did not rock the boat. And he says the reason is because when he is comparing it with the current GNU in South Africa, the difference that I got there was with the DA.
Well, let's take one item at a time and go through the sequence of things that he discussed. And in this particular case, let's start at the beginning of that article. One of the things that he claims is that Mugabe ring-fenced strategic ministries and portfolios you would have never given away. Would you say that was a top achievement in terms of him achieving his objective of making sure that the GNU of 2008 to 2013 was ineffective?
No, I cannot say, that, Zanu PF managed to keep, the ministries that they thought they were, they must hold on to. I think it was not a matter of who gets which ministry. Yes, they are key ministries, that's for sure. But I mean, during the GNU or leading to the GNU, CCC was all about finance. They wanted that, that portfolio. They wanted that ministry particular, and we cannot continue. For me, I feel we cannot continue blaming, because we did not have this particular ministry, we could not do ABC. No. I think that is that is just an excuse of being incompetent, not being able to do your job, not being able to remember what the whole,
that argument has been used by many people, that Mugabe denied the key portfolios to the various MDC leadership. I would put it slightly differently. And I would say that in this particular case, people should never forget that the GNU's primary purpose was to implement the democratic reforms. Yes, running the day-to-day affairs of the state, we want a working ministry of health and primary education, etc., etc. Those were important. Nobody's denying that. But the primary purpose was to implement the democratic reforms. And those CCC or MDC at the time failed to do. And I agree with you there. It had nothing to do with the fact that Mugabe had ring-fenced strategic ministries. Because implementing reforms, say, for instance, of ZEC, you did not need to be a minister of justice and parliamentary affairs or reforming the police. You did not need to be a minister or a deputy minister in the Ministry of Home Affairs to reform the police. And that point must be made, and must be made emphatically.
Yes, that's what I wanted to say. There was, you didn't need any, ministry for you to table a reform. That could have just been somebody within parliament that would speak and put it on the agenda. And they did not do that. So I think that is, we cannot validate that as an excuse for failure to implement reforms.
The second point that he makes is, secondly, he says he identified key ministries he could give away to ensure the GNU partners had some veneer of credibility. Again, that was true, but that did not stop MDC implementing reforms. So I think he is failing to appreciate the distinction between a government who is in the, a normal government whose main task is to run state affairs on a day-to-day basis. If that is your only primary function, yes, ring-fencing ministries to one group will make sure that the other group does not have any significant influence. And also identifying key ministries and just giving them to your partners so that they've got some semblance of power. Yes, it's a token thing. But again, in the sense of the GNU, it had no effect whatsoever. And the third item, he says here, isolating key ministries, which for the purposes of control were to be co-ministered. What's your comment on that one?
I believe that, the GNU, or before the GNU was agreed to, there was some form of negotiation, right? There was, after the negotiation, there was, an agreement to say, okay, we are in agreement, we will take this and you will take that, because everybody, there has to be a compromise somewhere. So for then CCC, I always refer to CCC, but then MDC, it's one of the same thing. They had for me, I think they had the opportunity to say, we want this and we want that. And ZANU PF would have said, okay, fine, they wanted to ring fence them, but they could have simply just said, if you do not want to share equally, we would have walked away. But then they didn't do that. They agreed to it. So for me, I think the bottom line is, at that point, they saw themselves as this is a way for us to go into government, and became complacent, that they did not think through and they just dived in. And that's how, ZANU PF Mugabe got away with most of these ministries. That is what I firmly believe.
Yeah, but again, I think that point of control is important. Mugabe was a control freak, and there's no doubt. In fact, George Aramba goes on to mention other things as well, as how he appointed deputy ministers even in those ministries that were given to MDC, so that they would play the checkmate to the minister, and also the permanent secretaries, to undermine the power of the MDC minister and so forth. Those were important in terms of running the day-to-day affairs of government. But it must be emphasized, they did not stop the opposition implementing the democratic reforms, which would have ended ZANU PF, the de facto one-party state in Zimbabwe. So the two things must be kept separate and distinct. So if we are talking about implementing reforms, none of what George Aramba is talking about here had any effect. I think what had any meaningful effect in MDC's competence is what you were talking about earlier on, when you were talking about which George Aramba talks about here in the form of the propensity for soft lifestyles. That affected MDC leaders' failure to perform their duties, even within government, day-to-day operation, and also in terms of failing to implement even democratic reforms, which was their primary purpose. So I don't know whether you'd want us to go on to that one now and focus on that one, Ben.
Yes, but before, I also wanted to add to say, they are wanting to be in government also, played a significant, disadvantage to them, in terms of choosing the key ministries. I think going into the GNU, MDC did not, negotiate properly in terms of what ministries and how it was going to be equated freely. So we cannot blame the other. We just have to say, their desire to be in government, they saw this as an opportunity to finally form or finally be part of government, that they did not negotiate properly. That's one thing that I would like to add on there. And then, you were talking about the soft lifestyle, of which, it's evident from the very beginning. Like I said, their desire, once they saw the prospect of being part of government, it kind of just, I think it overwhelmed them, and they got overzealous and forgot their mandate completely. And after that day, it was, let's see what we can get for ourselves out of this deal.
Well, I like the way George Charamba put it, that in fact, in this particular case, he is writing it in comparing Zimbabwe and saying South Africa is not Zimbabwe. The DA is a strong partner in the ANC-DA partnership because they've got the economic muscle, and they've been in power, in positions of power and authority. Whereas, and he goes to quote George Charamba, a far cry from our ragtag MDC-T, whose material and power profile was well known. It was not hard to toss temptation to them and distract them with soft lifestyles. And I think he's absolutely right. And he goes on to say, overall, they were hungry for power and good life, both of which became their undoing and utter ruin. 3 years into the GNU, an image of corruption, blatant abuse of power became the norm within the MDC. I think he is absolutely right there. He is admitting which a truth that MDC leaders themselves have all along tried to deny. During the GNU, many people were asking why are MDC leaders failing to implement reforms? And some of the Zanu PF cronies started even boasting that MDC leaders, they will never implement reforms. They will never rock the boat. And that is the truth that Charamba is trying to say here. That these guys, they were offered the trappings of high office, and they completely forgot the agenda of democratic reforms. Completely forgot it.
Yeah, if I may add, let me put it this way. Zanu PF is very, very good at offering bait, at dangling bait in front of the opposition. They've done this so many a time. Look, they have not just the opposition, but they give bribes and soft lifestyle so that people in certain positions do what they want. Let's look at it this way. Just before Parliament ended, last year, MPs were given $40,000 packages, loans, but those are packages, right? They are given cars, and they have the capacity to demand what type of car they want, right? Now they're driving Land Cruisers. So Zanu PF will give those. Time and time again, this is why we always ask, why is the opposition so keen to keep on participating in rigged elections? This is the reason, what George Charamba is saying. The soft lifestyle. Being an MP, you get paid. And you get paid very well because, let's put it this way, mathematically, you've invested $1,000 for you to do the registration and everything. And the first few months in office, you're given, I think they were given $70,000 loans to buy cars. And if you want to upgrade more than the 70,000, you can add up, but 70,000 is guaranteed. So your $1,000 is just turned to 30,000, and we haven't even started talking about transport allowance, bush allowance, hotels, right? They do not want to come to Harare, to Parliament, and sleep in where ordinary persons, they want to sleep in hotels. So that they will just show you that is enough reason and justify what George Charamba is saying, to say, what we were able to do was to dangle bait in front of the opposition, and they took the bait. They wanted power. They became power hungry. This is evident now within Triple C, while they are fighting day and night. You have seen it, not just recently, but you had the Mai Kupe, you had the Monzora, you have this, the whole Chawangu saga. Before there was Changirai, there was Tambara, they are all power hungry. And this, what George Charamba has said, I think is very valid, and the evidence is galore to support his claim. So I think when it comes to the opposition, they have no excuse whatsoever, because we saw it broad daylight. The evidence is clear.
Well, the only thing that George Charamba did not admit in his article is that this is not unique to the opposition alone. Zanu PF leaders themselves have fallen trap to the same thing. I referred earlier on to some of the cronies boasting that Mazwane MDC-T. They were saying something that they knew from their own experience. As soon as Zimbabwe became independent, Mugabe started bribing his fellow Zanu PF officials to the point where the cabinet, the Zanu PF cabinet, was a joke. Margaret Dongo at one point called the Zanu PF leaders, ministers, deputy ministers, MPs, and so forth, Bakadzi wa Mugabe, in sheer frustration at how they all groveled to Mugabe. I'd just like to play a short video clip of Dr. Simba Makoni explaining how this came about soon after independence.
I recall very clearly that when we came into office in 1980, we inherited Ian Smith's systems. And Ian Smith's ministers drove Peugeot 504s. They drove themselves from home to work in their Land Rovers and all in kinds. Most of them were farmers. They parked their Land Rover and then they used the government vehicle when they were at work with a chauffeur. When they finished at night, they packed them and they took theirs to go home. Within the month of our coming into office, Prime Minister Mugabe then directed that every minister be issued with an E-class Mercedes-Benz, and the Peugeot 504s were retired to permanent secretaries, and the deputy ministers who then took over. We can also look at many other things, small they may appear at the time. Let me hazard that even at that point, Enos Nkala was our Minister of Finance. I don't think we knew what budget we inherited from Ian Smith when the decision was taken to buy those E-class fleets for the ministers. So the material affection for material themes has always been with us. And the differentiation also, even going back into the camps, Zema Shefu, Neze, my comrades, Makada, were not the same. So much so that even today, when the so-called Minister for Presidential Affairs or Provincial Governor, as they were, goes to Bubi or Binga, they will be served separately and differently from the other people. The avarice grew as we began to exploit the opportunities of office. When I was in the government, the minister was allocated one vehicle that they kept, which was the sedan they used in town. If you needed to go off-road, then your ministry hired off-road vehicles from the CMED, and you were charged for it. Now a minister will have an average of 4 vehicles in his forecourt, all at government's expense.
So the leadership modeled the wrong kind of behavior, and that kind of behavior permeated all across our society. Our CEOs, like you're saying, heads of parastatals and so forth, modeled from the top.
Indeed. Indeed. I made a passing reference that we have CEOs who will buy themselves a luxury car when they can't pay wages at the end of the week or end of the month. This has been so entrenched in our psyche, this showing off, as if you are a different person. You're breathing different air from those who don't drive Prados and Land Cruisers, from those who don't drive Jeep Cherokees. We have lost our humanity. There's lots of reference to Ubuntu, very farcical, superficial, not coming from the heart. We have changed. We have changed because of our appetite for power. And we have changed because of our avarice for material things. I think when we begin to associate a position of authority and responsibility with material well-being and acquisitions, that's when the rot set in. A Toyota Cressida isn't worth much compared to 6 kgs of gold and 15 billion worth of Marange diamonds and backhanders on contracts to pave 200 kilometers of roads. So when you ask, is there a moment? There is not one, but quite clearly, I think we began to change noticeably in the latter half of the 80s into the early 90s. Our character became preoccupied with power, with control, and with accumulation. That's where I would put the starting line.
So in summary then, we should not be surprised that MDC guys, when they got into power, they too became obsessed about power, or as Charamba wants to call it, their soft lifestyles. And they accomplished absolutely nothing. And I think Mugabe realized from the word go when he signed the Global Political Agreement 2008 that these guys are hungry. He only has got to dangle in front of them the temptations, and they'll fall for it. And they did. The real tragedy here is that the people of Zimbabwe themselves have been slow to realize what went wrong with the GNU. Indeed, many people out there don't even know that the primary purpose of the GNU of 2008 to 2013 was to implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. But that was the primary purpose. And we are stuck with a vote rigging Zanu PF because we failed to implement the reforms. And ever since the GNU, in fact, MDC guys have been participating in flawed elections out of greed to give Zanu PF legitimacy. That is the problem. And that is what we must wake up to and address if we want to move on, to move forward. But as for my conclusion on the GNU in South Africa between ANC and DA, the two are totally different. And George Charamba is missing the point, trying to compare the two. That is a government of national unity to carry out day-to-day functions of government, which if ANC had one majority, they would have carried out on their own. Strictly speaking, it is just a coalition. It's not even a government of national unity, in the same sense as we had a government of national unity in 2008 to 2018. Zanu PF did not win that majority and was recognized. Zanu PF was forced into the GNU because SADC and the AU refused to accept Zanu PF as the winner of the elections. The electoral process in 2008 was not recognized as legitimate. Just as much SADC have rejected the 2023 elections as flawed and illegal. Strictly speaking, they should have denied Zanu PF political legitimacy. But for reasons that we've dealt with on this platform, they did not. So the GNU in South Africa, they call it a government of national unity, but strictly speaking, it's just a coalition of a government whose primary task is to implement the day-to-day running of the state affairs. The GNU in Zimbabwe, 2008 to 2018, their primary function was to implement the democratic reforms to ensure that Zimbabwe had free, fair, and credible elections. No party, Zanu PF or MDC, had the authority to govern on its own. They were forced to go into that coalition. SADC was the guarantor of the global political agreement. There is no SADC supervising ANCDA in South Africa. If there was to be a misunderstanding between the two main parties there, ANC could form another government with some other coalition. If, for instance, there was to be a vote of no confidence in that government. The Zanu PF, MDC-T, MDC-N, GNU could not be, no individual party could walk away from it because it was part of the global political agreement. So the two are totally different animals. Thank you very much, Ben. I don't know whether you want to give your closing comments there.
Yes, in closing, I would like to remain home with the Zimbabwe issue. I think you have explained the difference between the South Africa, DA coalition and the Zimbabwe GNU. So I would like to say, with what Dr. Sibama Koni has said there, it started in 1980, where Zanu PF, started giving away, bribes to people so that they do not ask questions, they do not rock the boat, and they dangled it in front of the opposition, and they have since seen that the opposition are willing participants as long as you are also giving them the freebies. Let's look at it this way. I mean, Dr. Sibama Koni is saying that after independence, they gave ministers one car. Right now, ministers have graduated. They have now a convoy. They move with at least 3 to 4 cars, and the one car has been now given to MPs. MPs are now moving with very, very expensive, nothing less than $40,000 cars. That is what they are being allocated, $40,000 to $70,000 cars. That is their allocation. And the opposition, everybody in the opposition have since realized that, if I invest my little $1,000 to register so that I can become a participant of this election, if I win, I stand to win so much. It's now it's become a very fast way to increase your wealth. $1,000, you end up with 40 to 70,000. You have a free car, free housing allowances. You don't have to do much at the end of the day. So I firmly believe that the opposition have lost their mandate. They've lost their way. They have lost the reason, the main reason why they are there in the first place. They are now chasing, these freebies that Zanu PF is dangling in front of them. And Zanu PF has seen that this strategy actually works. Hence, you find even the Pollard guys have joined in the ship to say, most of them know they will not win anyway. But since the fact that there's Pollard there and there's going to be free vehicles, there's going to be free hotels, there will be free food, I might as well join the bandwagon. Put in my money there, have it quadruple, or, I don't know how many percent it is. It's an investment for them. So unfortunately, like rightfully you said, it is the people that have been so slow to see this pattern and this trend. This is what Zanu PF has learned about our opposition. This is how shallow our opposition is. And every time you find them, when they implode or when they fight amongst themselves, money and power is at the center of it. So I think with all this evidence, it is now for us to realize that we truly need a different group or a different crop, of oppositions. This one that we have is now rot. It's rotten. We have stuck with them. I think we have risked our lives for them. We have been chased away from our homes. We have been through so much, only for them to betray us because of their own, of their own selfish reasons, wanting the soft life, like how George Charamba puts it. And I think with this here, if those that would open up their eyes to see what is in front of them, we can all see that this opposition is just as equally as corrupt, incompetent, and they will not get us anywhere. We need to change for us to change Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben, and thank you very much to the listeners who were able to join us today, and I hope you'll be able to do it again in future. We'll try to keep the time of 7 o'clock UK time and 8 o'clock Zimbabwe time for broadcast. Thank you very much and have a good night.